It's time for the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
So I've said for years, and this is not nothing that you haven't already heard, our labor laws are so outdated that anyone consulting for these companies where their employees want to unionize, they want to exercise their right to organize. If you're a consultant, it would actually be malpractice if you didn't tell those employers to fire the most vocal person. Because look, the reality is the penalties are pathetic. And yet here is another in a long, long line of examples. 3 years after being fired, 2 Philadelphia Starbucks workers are getting their jobs back. Now you've got 7, I guess, from Starbucks in Buffalo getting their jobs back. And what's the punishment? Yeah, they're going to get reinstated. They're going to get made whole, which means whatever they would have earned at Starbucks, they'll get that pay, minus whatever they earned in the interim. And the dreaded, we won't do it again until we do it again. This is why we need major comprehensive labor law reform. And here to share some thoughts on maybe just how bad it is, and if maybe I'm just being too jaded and pessimistic. And here to share some thoughts on if this is a huge win. I've asked my good friend Steve Greenhouse to come talk with us. Steve is a labor journalist, author of numerous books, including the most recent one, Beaten Down, Worked Up: The Past, Present, and Future of American Labor. Stephen, thanks for taking time for us.
Good to be on with a good friend of labor, Rick.
I'm looking at this. I'm looking at this story of you've got the Starbucks workers in Philadelphia, the Starbucks workers in Buffalo. They've got their jobs back. The NLRB has come out with this decision that's really scathing. Does it matter?
It matters somewhat. I mean, I think there's so backing up. So. We saw this, inspiring wave of unionization over the past year. Starbucks, Amazon, REI, Chipotle, even Apple. Whoever thought Apple would unionize? And now a Potbelly sandwich shop in Oregon, they're trying to unionize. So there's a lot of excitement, and I've been around a long time, and there's more excitement for unions now than any time in my lifetime. But Rick, we're seeing this humongous, ferocious pushback by corporations, by Starbucks and Amazon, and many, the NLRB keeps accusing these companies of violating the law to crack down on unions. Some judges have followed up by saying, yes, you're right. This judge's decision today in about Buffalo said that Starbucks was engaged in egregious and widespread violations of the law, ordering the reinstatement of 7 workers, ordering reimbursement of 27 workers who were punished improperly, ordering Starbucks to reopen some stores in Buffalo. That's a big deal. That's rare. So I think, you asked me, does this make a difference? I think the case is building against Starbucks about how, I'll use the word, notorious a lawbreaker is. And Bernie Sanders is saying, we want Howard Schultz in the Senate next, to come and face the music.
Right.
So I think, all this kind of is helping maybe turn the tide to put more pressure on Starbucks. And we had this weird thing last week where a federal judge issued an extraordinary cease and desist order against Starbucks, saying, thou shalt not break the law, thou shalt stop firing all these workers for supporting a union. And then mysteriously, the judge reversed himself the next day. And people were so happy when he issued this order. But I think, again, with decisions in the Philadelphia case you just mentioned and the Buffalo case, I think, the evidence is building for a judge to issue a cease and desist order saying, Starbucks, you've been found so often to have illegally fired workers for supporting a union, and yet you continue to do so. So we need a nationwide order to stop it. So I think the momentum is building. Having said that, I agree fully with you, Rick, that the punishment doesn't fit the crime. I think we're seeing, there have been studies showing that basically 1 in 5 rank and file leaders leading a unionization effort at their company gets fired. And there's really no disincentive for companies not to fire these people because they can't be fined, because, as you say, the law is so so toothless, the penalties are so paltry. And in my book, Beaten Down, Worked Up, I wrote about a nursing home worker who was fired for supposedly trying to strangle a nurse. It took 6 years of litigation for federal judges to rule that that is total BS. That story that he tried to strangle a nurse is poppycock. And you think maybe the nursing home would be fined $200, $300, $400, $5,100, pay years of back pay. You only have to pay $1,500 in back pay because the guy found another job and he didn't lose much money from getting fired. So, without any fines, often with very little back pay, they're really, I think businesses are told by their $1,000 an hour lawyers, anti-union lawyers, it's probably not so bad to break the law and fire these people because that will help cripple the unionization effort.
No, look, I did organizing years ago, and this is before all of the excitement, and that was the MO back then. They would fire the most vocal organizer, and it would send a chilling effect across the entire unit, and you ended up losing that because, well, the most vocal, most pro-union person was out of the picture. And then, you'd fight for a year, 2, 3 down the road to get them their jobs back, which rarely they ever took back because they found something somewhere else. There was no monetary penalty, but the company, they had to post that dreaded, we won't do it again until next time letter.
So what was one of the unusual and good things about the judge's decision today involving Buffalo is that he said that Howard Schultz himself would either have to speak to the Buffalo workers or do a video kind of apologizing and explaining, read this 14-page letter about how Starbucks egregiously broke the law. I imagine that Starbucks is going to appeal this up to the 5-person NLRB. And if the 5-person NLRB upholds the judge's opinion, then it will go to the Federal Court of Appeals and maybe the Supreme Court. And maybe in 15 years, if you and I are still alive, Rick, they'll settle this. So it's really, really hard. One of the great things about that almost cease and desist order is like, if a judge does issue a nationwide cease and desist against Starbucks, and then Starbucks continues to illegally fire them, then you could fine the hell out of them, for being in contempt of court. And then that, even though the National Labor Relations Act doesn't have any real teeth to fine a company, if they can face contempt for breaking a cease and desist order, then that might make a difference.
See, is there no point in our labor law where you go, you know what, you've been so bad at this, you've broken so many laws, you've done so many egregious things that we're going to impose a contract on you, and there's nothing you can do about it other than sit down and take your medicine?
Your dream? No. I mean, so I just wrote this lengthy story for the Guardian newspaper saying, we've had these huge union successes, remarkable victories over the past, since December 21, when the Starbucks workers first won in Buffalo, and they won at Amazon on April 1st, and they won at REI, and they won at Chipotle in August, and they won at Apple. And these are big deals. But at none of these companies have the workers gotten their first contract. And I interviewed all these, experts, who said, even if companies are found to be deliberately dragging their feet, even if they're deliberately acting in bad faith, and the NLRB and federal judges rule that the companies are breaking the law, you still can't require them to reach a contract. You can't require them to make any concessions. So it becomes like a cat chasing its tail, trying to get the companies to really reach a contract. And that is a big, big problem. And Joe Biden was pushing for this Protecting the Right to Organize Act, this pro-labor legislation, and Bernie Sanders just reintroduced it the other day. And this legislation would do many important things, but two of them would be, it would, if a union wins and after 120 days they still haven't reached a contract, you appoint an arbitrator to basically rule this should be the contract. So instead of workers waiting 2, 3, 4 years to get a first contract, boom, they have a first contract. And I think companies like Starbucks and Amazon realize, if we could drag out ever reaching a first contract for 1 year or 2 years or more, that's really, really going to discourage and deter, workers at non-union Amazons and non-union Starbucks to like, why should I even bother to unionize? And the other thing about the PRO Act is it would, for the first time, allow the National Labor Relations Board to impose real substantial 5-digit, 6-digit fines against companies that break the law by, for instance, firing pro-union workers.
Yeah, I'm all in favor of the PRO Act, just like I was in favor of the incremental move forward that the Employee Free Choice Act would have gotten us during the Bush years. We've been talking about this stuff for decades now, and yet we've gotten no further because, as you pointed out, corporate America knows all they've got to do is play out the clock. They got to delay this stuff out and push it off because the next administration might not be as friendly for workers.
This is true. I mean, we have the problem of, so nowadays, 70% of the public approve of a union, the highest number since 1965, and in 57, 58 years. That's a long time. 1 in 2 non-union workers say they'd vote to join a union if they could. Basically, 3 in 4 young workers say they'd vote to join a union if they could. People want a union, and they want it to be easier to unionize, but when you try to pass a law that would make it easier to unionize, people from a certain party that receive, especially the Republican Party, receive a ton of donations from corporations. They're not going to vote to approve the PRO Act or any other legislation that would make it easier to unionize. So it's really hard for labor. I remember Rich Trumka said, there's a real conundrum for the nation's workers. Like, for unions to grow stronger, we need Congress to pass legislation. But Congress won't pass legislation unless unions are stronger to pressure them to do it. So like we're caught. And it seems that, corporate power, and, even though, there's such a surge of enthusiasm about unions right now, corporate power keeps growing and growing. And, $1 billion, donations from billionaire groups like the Koch brothers network, really have a lot of, lawmakers, especially Republican lawmakers, dancing to their tune, and they'll vote against anything that would help unions.
Yeah. Let me ask you this though. I mean, because you go back to before the Depression, the 20s and 30s. There were people who were militant. I mean, you had a much more militant movement of people who weren't in unions, who were fighting the fight. And there are people now who think the National Labor Relations Board and the National Labor Relations Act are outdated and not useful, and that we just need to be building worker power outside of this because all of this stuff. We're winning elections. We're just not getting anywhere. What do you say to that idea that maybe we need to just scrap this and move in a different direction?
So. I think the National Labor Relations Act helps in some ways. The Starbucks workers, have unionized at 280 Starbucks. That's good. I think without all the illegalities by Starbucks, we might have seen workers at 1,000 Starbucks unionized by now. And you're absolutely right, Rick. Many workers were very, very militant in the 1920s and 30s, and they got some results without the National Labor Relations Act, and all their militancy scared a lot of companies. If we got rid of the National Labor Relations Act, I think Americans just aren't militant in the same way as people in the 1920s and 30s were. I could be workers at least aren't. I think the Proud Boys, unfortunately, are very militant, the Oath Keepers, but that's a whole other thing. So I think the important thing isn't to scrap the National Labor Relations Act; it's somehow to strengthen it. And a big debate right now is, Rick, is some people saying, with Congress, so divided, and with the filibuster, it's nearly impossible to strengthen the National Labor Relations Act. So instead, let's somehow find a way to give the blue states more latitude to make it easier for workers to unionize. But that's hard because generally, labor relations laws of unionization are done at the federal level, and you have to find a way to prevent federal rules from preempting the states from doing these things. And a good example, so California passed this new law to protect fast food workers, and the unions and the government and business would appoint this council of 13, 14 members that would make recommendations on improving fast food workers' jobs, on raising their pay. That would make legislations to the legislature. It's sort of a means of collective bargaining, Rick, but it's different. But I think it could be allowed and not be so-called preempted or overruled by federal law. So there's a greater effort to do more on the state level that way.
No, it's going to be this is going to be an interesting year because there is so much excitement. There's so many big fights coming up. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show here with Stephen Greenhouse, labor journalist and author of the book Beaten Down, Worked Up. The Past, Present, and Future of American Labor. We'll get links out on social media. How you can take a look at this. But this is going to be an interesting summer because you've got some pretty big labor fights coming up. You've got the Teamsters, negotiating a contract with UPS. You've got the UAW and the auto industry. There's a lot of that, plus all of this organizing going on. So this is kind of going to be like a labor summer, if you will.
Yes, and there's this big labor spring going on that many universities around the country, with all the organizing of grad students and adjunct faculty and some full-time faculty, there are going to be all these teach-ins. So there's something called the Labor Spring. This being, folks out of Georgetown are the big sponsors. Then I think you're right. There's going to be a very hot labor summer. There really could be a strike by more than 300,000 workers at UPS. And, UPS is trying to, crack down and save money because it's facing intense lower wage competition from FedEx and Amazon. And they say kind of understandably, hey, Teamsters, we love you, but we got to be more competitive. So we got to, cut costs here and there. And Sean O'Brien, the new president of the Teamsters, is saying, we're tired of concessions. We're tired of being pushed around. And someone who's newly elected president of a union often wants to show his mettle, show their mettle, flex their muscles. So it might be a real fight between this powerful company that says we need to cut costs to remain competitive and this powerful union who says we're not going to swallow any concessions anymore. So it could be a very hot summer.
It's going to be interesting. And as someone who's been a Teamster for over 30 years, it's something I'm watching very closely because a lot of my Teamsters brothers at UPS are saying, the money's one thing, but it's the treatment. It's the constant monitoring. It's the constant harassment. That's the real issue that I hear from most UPS people that I know. So
and I just wrote this big problem about the increasing problem of high heat for workers, and not just farm workers, not just construction workers, but UPS drivers. They complain that their trucks aren't air conditioned, and what's it like making UPS deliveries in Texas or Arizona or Louisiana in July and August? So that's also a hot issue. No pun intended.
But again, it's going to be a very interesting summer. It's one I'm sure that you're going to be on top of, and I hope you'll come back and share some more thoughts. Hope folks will take a look at your book, Beaten Down and Worked Up. Also, the most recent article you got out, Old School Union Busting, how U.S. corporations are quashing the new wave of organizing over at The Guardian. We'll get links out. Stephen, I appreciate the time.
Okay, always good to talk. Be well. Keep it up. Keep up the good work.
Thanks so much, Stephen Greenhouse. Again, make sure you check out the book. Gonna take a quick break. Right back with your thoughts. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
For more than 40 years, under Democratic and Republican presidents, the old factory towns in America's heartland have been taking a beating. Factories closed, trade deals that usually helped big corporations instead of working people. Folks losing their union protections and pensions as wages fell and healthcare costs rose. Roads, bridges, water systems, and schools crumbling. And of course, the opioid epidemic, which has just been devastating. Now folks are getting hit with rising prices, while huge wealthy corporations jack up costs and brag to their stockholders about record-breaking profits. Thing is, though, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Unions are making a comeback, with more organizing in the last couple of years than in a long time. And the Biden administration being more supportive of unions than any president since FDR. The American Recovery Package has allowed cities and counties to hire new police officers and firefighters and start rebuilding their communities again. And after years of politicians talking about it, they finally passed a big new infrastructure package to rebuild roads and bridges, fix drinking water systems, and make the energy grid more secure. The new CHIPS bill that got passed will bring jobs back home and has already resulted in big announcements of major new factories opening. The Inflation Reduction Act, in addition to finally allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices with Big Pharma, will lower energy prices and create millions of new jobs by dramatically increasing the manufacturing of solar panels, wind turbines, electric cars, and energy-efficient home appliances. Now our country is at a crossroads. We're finally turning things around after 40 years of screwing over working people. But will we keep moving in the right direction? That's our choice as Americans.
So Mike Pence did an interview with CBS News, which I found very interesting. He said that he's not going to commit to supporting Donald Trump. He says he thinks different times calls for different leadership. I'm going, wait a second, hold on. This is the guy who put you out to get murdered. And you're going to say, oh, I think different times call for different leadership. Wow. I mean, and I thought Ted Cruz was bad. I thought Ted Cruz was bad kissing, Trump's behind after Trump called his wife ugly. I thought he was bad. This guy was going to get hung. They locked him out of the building. Wow. Look, I guess, it is all about the politics, isn't it? Speaking about all about the politics, I'm sure you saw the story. Eli Lilly today announced that they are going to be capping the price of insulin at $35 a month for everyone. People with private insurance, people with no insurance, everyone gets insulin, $35 a month. It's interesting. And this is, when I saw this, I go, I think it's interesting when the CEO of a company gets a subpoena to testify in front of Bernie Sanders, that amazingly that they decide to do, I don't know, the right thing. Now, understand, this isn't the benevolence of Eli Lilly. They're not having a good heart. They haven't seen the light. There's no epiphany here. This is purely a strategic decision because insulin is the hotbed drug right now. This is them going, we're going to voluntarily do it. We don't need you to pass legislation. No, don't do that. No, that would be bad, because then maybe you'll go looking at all of the other drugs that we're gouging consumers for. Maybe we'll start looking at every other drug that we're charging, 300, 400 times, what it should cost, what we charge other countries, especially Medicare and Medicaid. This is one of the, again, no benevolence here, no benevolence here. But I do find it interesting, which for me, again, this is one of those moments, been saying it for a long time, saying it for years now, where maybe Bernie's going to be my Harry Truman. Maybe Bernie's my Truman. Start calling these war profiteers in, start calling these pandemic profiteers in, start putting them in the hot seat. You'll start seeing prices come down. You'll start seeing it. Today also, again, this is one of those moments where I'm torn because Republicans put forth this Data Act, H.R. 1153, that would ban TikTok from all cell phones. I think TikTok is a horrible. I think the fact that the Chinese Communist government has a direct line into our kids is a horrible thing. They've banned TikTok on all government phones, and the logic goes, look, if we banned it on government phones, if it's so bad that the government workers can't have it, why should our kids have it? I kind of agree with that. But here, Republicans have moved this forward. All of the Republicans voted for it. All the Democrats voted against it. And you go, this is how this is going to work, so get ready for the messaging. Democrats want your kids to be controlled by the Chinese Communist government. And that is not at all reality. What the Democrats are saying here is they want to slow things down. They want to have the organization that is generally in charge of this, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, the CFIUS, they want them to move this forward and to do what they do first. And then down the road, now me personally, I say you ban the damn thing. And the same thing with when Trump allowed Huawei to continue to sell here in the U.S. We've got to start decoupling from the Chinese having such control of our communications and our infrastructure. That has got to happen, and it's got to happen quickly. And this is a moment. This could be a bipartisan, nonpartisan moment where the reality is they've got control of our farmlands. Not a lot of it, but they have some of it. They've got control of our manufacturing capacities. They're possibly going to take over Taiwan at some point and have control of how to make semiconductors that we desperately need. This is where the U.S. has got to lift its head up and go, that greed thing, the money thing, the green thing. Maybe we got to start looking at the you and me thing. Enough with the billionaires and the wealthy lining their pockets. It's about the rest of us. So I think Democrats made a mistake here on this legislation, and we're going to talk about this going forward because clearly there's going to be more like this. But I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Should Dems gone along, and would this have put Biden in a hot seat? Could be part of that as well. Want to hear your thoughts. rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Before we close the program, we want to take a moment to thank our viewers and to share a little bit about why we do what we do. At The Rick Smith Show, we believe that media today is almost entirely controlled by corporate greed. So we have now 24-hour news channels. But instead of 24 hours of news, what we get is 1 hour repeated 24 times, and with tons of commercials creating obscene amounts of profits. Information once presented as a public service has now become a private commodity. So when lies make money, lies are what we get. We get a corporate-controlled rage machine feeding us anger and hate, trying to convince us that our problems are right, left, or red, blue, when they are and always have been up, down, the wealthiest 1% versus the rest of us. Our goal is to be an alternative to that machine, not as a news show with a fancy journalist out front, but as a talk show run by a union truck driver and a team of working-class heroes just like you. Everything we do, both what we get right and what we get wrong, is dedicated to advancing the interests of America's working families. No corporate ad buys, no think tanks, no focus groups, no talking points. We are media by working people, for working people. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.